Alright, welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, I was sort of doing a lot of searching of what I wanted to play. Originally, I was going to play EK Ignite, and then I was like, I don't know, I wanted to play something super strong, especially for early delving. And looking at the changes to the masteries and, you know, the changes to the trios overall, there was like just no other choice but to go back to something that I really enjoyed, but I wanted to push further originally, but I didn't. And like me to say, this build that I'm about to talk about was insanely powerful. And I know a lot of other people ended up playing this, but this is actually my Shield Crush Juggernaut from, I think, 3.19 that I put a build up for. So, a few things about this. This does use uniques. This guide is not going to be a leveling guide. This is going to be talking about the character, how you get it working, basically where its sources of damage come from, and all that sort of jazz. I have included leveling trees at this stage with a bit of a sort of blurb on how to early level this, but ultimately that'll be a separate video I'll release in the next week, because on stream we're going to run a practice run with this build, basically, and put together the leveling guide. So anyway, what is this build? Well, basically it uses a shield called Emperor's Vigilance, and that, having a look at last league, was a little bit exy at the start of the league. I'll just pull it on the screen now and show you exactly what I mean. So this is the POE Ninja metrics on it last league. By like the first like 3 days, it was at 90 chaos. So we're gonna have to do some scratching together. But we'll do a leveling guide on this anyway and talk about how we best get around this in the interim. Realistically, the way that this skill works is, and the reason why the shield's really powerful, is it applies you glancing blows, huge amount of spell block early on, and then it just scales an absolutely absurd amount of energy shield and flat armor on the shield, and then damage taken from blocks. From blocked hits cannot bypass energy shield, so you could actually stack a bit of energy shield, which tends to be the case with this build. You have like 1200 energy shield, which just gives you more defense. The other thing that synergizes with this, that actually applies a hell of a lot of crit, because this is a heavy crit based character, is Seething Fury. And the way that Seething Fury works is whatever percentage of offhand critical strike chance per 10 maximum energy shield on shield, and crit multi is also applied per 10 maximum energy shield on shield. And in this case, this shield has like 383 energy shield, as well as an absolute metric ton of armor, which makes it the best shield in spot or in slot for this particular build. Now, with the league changes that are coming in, arguably by like day 3, if nobody else plays this build, so by like day 3, 4, the shield goes down to like absolutely dirt cheap, because it becomes pretty readily available because it's got a high common drop rate on it. And then you could have two shield. You could have you could have two shields or one shield, and then once we figure out how the leveling system works for applying skill trees onto the shield, or how the skill tree system works for uniques, then arguably you could actually have Emperor's Vigilance with a skill tree on it, which is super fucking powerful. Now, beyond that, the other thing that this build does is it scales a shit ton of armor. And off of that, we use a replica Dream Feather, and, you know, we'll end up getting a corrupted one to get melee hits to a percentage chance to fortify, so it's free fortify. And then basically per 450 armor on the build, and as you can see, we've got a lot of sources of armor, you stack up an absolutely huge amount of damage. Now, endgame wise, this particular build, if you got a Mage Blood, you could scale up armor even more. And I'll also put in place the conversation here. This was pre-Progenesis Flask, and this was super tanky. And I think sitting on idle, we get to like, what was it? Somewhere in the vicinity of like 571 life regeneration before we actually start doing any real regeneration, and before everything else. The other thing that we can also, that I'll talk through very shortly, is the improvements that come off the nose this time around, that actually give us access to some really cool skills and setups. Now, the other thing with this is I actually used All's Uprisings. Main reason why, this is really good at farming alls, and you would have seen in the video at the very start, this just smashes a 280 plus all with every pen modifier and everything. This build was nuts in Delve. Now, when I say nuts, it got, without Mage Blood, it got to like 600-700 Delve pretty effortlessly. To get it past that point, you will need to get a Mage Blood to push further in Delve, but that tends to be the general story anyway with delving. So, all of that being said, I will run us through the gearing, skill setups, the tree, and I'll also talk through a leveling tree to get you started and what you need to do to get started with this build. But bear in mind, I'm going to put in a second video off the back of this video to talk you through and do a step-by-step leveling, act-by-act leveling run, and you can also see that on streams as well. Anyway, let's get into the video and talk about the potential things that we can do with this build off the back of the patch notes. Okay, so I forgot to mention, on a good day, this gets 20.8 million overlap damage on a Juggernaut, so it's pretty damn powerful. Effective hit pool hits 242,000 as well, and we overcap every resistance except Chaos, so we just put a Chaos Flask on and do that. Now, some of the things that changed in the 3.21 patch notes that will affect this build, and before we go into anything, there's only one bad change here, and it's a removal of the Determination Mastery node, but I'll explain why that's not even a bad change. And anyway, let's talk through it. So, stance clusters. So, the new Dancer Blades cluster has been added to the Jeweler starting area. Now we could potentially get to this cluster, and it will grant you Onslaught if you've changed stances recently. Free Onslaught. Like, we don't need a flask, and they've also removed a lot of the Onslaught itemization and whatnot through the game for momentum now. So we can get free Onslaught into this build, which will make it absolutely ridiculous when it's clearing, because this already does 8.95 APS on a Juggernaut, so it's pretty damn strong. So that'll just make this more powerful. Recovery Masteries. Life recovery from regeneration is not applied. This could be good or bad because this build has a lot of leech. It also has a lot of life regeneration. So I'm not too sure about this one, but hey, it could be good, could be bad. We could create a neutral point in here and go, hey, this is a neutral whatever, but you know, it could be good, could be bad. Reservation Masteries. Now we do use those, and we don't apply anything currently because there was no benefit previously to do that. But now we get 1+ percentage to all resistant masteries if you have reserved life and mana. And this build will do exactly that. We will, in this build, reserve some life to run Vitality to get our regeneration up higher. So basically, yeah, we can use this. And also, you know, we're going to be reserving Runner anyway. We have Auras, so, you know, 1% to all elemental resistances may not seem like a huge thing, but it is a huge thing. Now, Life Mastery is 15% increased life if there are no life modifiers on equipment, equipped body armor. I have theories around how this will work. Because we use a brass dome, there are no explicit or implicit crafts on this particular item that directly affect life as far as increasing it, but it does have strength, provides no bonus to maximum life. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that will be beneficial or not, and we're going to have to simply test it at this stage, because we're not getting life off of the item, but potentially because it's a life tag, it may not apply. So it may be a null change to the tree, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, it still looks pretty cool. Leech Masteries. Now, we hadn't used Leech in this build before because there was no advantage to it. Like, we could, I'll get a ton more damage off it. But one of the incentives to switch that around and maybe take off one of these crit nodes and sub it in for this Lust for Carnage node here is because we're an armor stacker on this build. So 40% increased armor and evasion while leeching, and we always leech. So a 40% increased armor is a damage boost, basically, based on the scale of armor versus the replica Dream Feather. So that's actually going to significantly increase defense and significantly increase our offense as well. So it's a win-win node, basically, on this build. Impale. 10% chance on hitting an enemy for all impales on that enemy to last for an additional hit. So like if you're running an additional impale Watcher's Eye, that could be really advantageous. And in fact, that's what we'd want to be doing once we get some currency up. Now, where we lose our determination mastery, we run like 4 or 5 auras on this build, by the way. We do run a mana mastery. And that was to deal with the increased cost of mana. Now, one of the advantages of this, and I balance this using mana, by the way, not life tap. So one of the advantages of this is we can get 12% increased mana reservation efficiency across all skills. So that's actually a buff versus 25% against one skill. So if I have 2 skills, that fixes the problem. If I have 3 skills, that fixes it even more at 50% reservation efficiency. Alternatively, even if they're smaller skills, this is actually going to be an advantageous node more than it is a disadvantage at this stage. Now, I did have accuracy masteries as well, so previously I hadn't actually taken Eagle Eye. Now, for the Jug, for anyone who knows anything about the Jug, basically this uses Undeniable, so 1% increased attack speed per 150 accuracy rating, and then you gain strength equal to, or accuracy equal to your strength. It's a huge buff for this build. Now, basically what they're saying is they're going to give us at -2 accuracy per level, which could be, what, 200, where they're going to give us 500 accuracy rating. What that basically means is we get an extra 300 accuracy, which then goes straight into this, and we get another 2% attack speed just off the cuff, like for nothing. And then not only that, it then stacks up our accuracy further and just makes this build overall stronger. So that's actually a buff if you look at it like that. It's actually a really good node for this type of build. Now, nerfs to this build: removal of determination, reservation mastery. That was the only nerf. Like, there was nothing else that I could see that was a disadvantage to this build. At this stage, there's nothing else in the patch notes that look airy-fairy or anything like that. The itemization on this build, which we'll talk about next, is pretty straightforward. So, you know, there's no changes that will affect that aberrantly. So, yeah, anyway, that's all there is to it. Pretty much the patch notes work in the favor of making this build stronger at the end of the day. I don't see any downsides at this point. Okay, so we'll talk through the end game of what you'll be targeting. Obviously, you know, we'll do an early leveling guide for this to talk through what you shouldn't get. But with this build, it's pretty straightforward from a gearing perspective. So the target item you're going to be wanting to go after in the first few days is going to be Emperor's Vigilance. In the absence of that, any shield over 1,000, I think it's Prismatic Eclipse or Prismatic something or other is usually a good shield to run. Alternatively, just any shield with a lot of armor is going to do the trick, because that's going to scale out pretty well for you anyway. And like, that's basically any tower shield sort of setup. This does use an All's Uprising, so it will put a limiter on when you can use Pride, but this build was designed to take down Crystal Kings at the end of the day and face tank Crystal Kings hard. So this won't really be an issue with this build. Like, if you play this build the way that I play this build, and if you're a Delver like me, this isn't a problem. Otherwise, Pride, All's Uprisings are like a few div even after the first few days, and the reason for that is nobody plays physical melee characters anymore. So this shouldn't be too expensive, unless I'm selling it to you for 10 div after this video. No, I wouldn't do that. That'd be market price. Anyway, so I use just a Royal Burgonet as an endgame item. Anything that's just high armor, resistances, life regeneration rate, I target on a lot of my gear, and flat life is what I used for the helm for this build. Now, the new helm that's coming out, that gives you life regeneration and the skill tree attached to that, that could potentially be an option as well, because the skill tree could actually be really good. This is a very generic helm. Like, you can replace this out pretty easily for almost anything. The implicits I got on here literally just hit Eldritch and whatever orbs to get those. It's pretty easy to get on this helm. And the only issue is getting 40% increased shield crush damage is a little bit hard with lab. But that's also going to be an enchant that's not necessarily going to be too difficult to get, and it's not going to be crazy expensive because Shield Crush isn't a huge league starter build for people. Replica Dream Feather. This will be a target item in the first few days. Like, when I say this build is not going to be like overnight, you're not going to be face tanking, right? It's going to take a couple of days to get it working, but it will hit maps and it will do pretty well with SST and the combination of Shield Crush and SST early on. But you will need just a normal Replica Dream Feather, and the plus side to that is when we figure out how the new skill tree system works with the items for uniques and how to unlock that, then you're going to have the option to do that with this item. Alternatively, you could use like a jeweled foil, which is what I was doing originally, and then have global attack speed on that. And there's also a prismatic blade that you can get, a unique prismatic blade that gives you attack speed as well globally based on the soccer colors. So you could always use that as well. But right now, like, the aim is Replica Dream Feather. It should be pretty cheap in the first few days because the only builds that can use this item are armor stackers like this. So, yeah, go figure. Now, rings, literally just anything to get your chaos resistance up on your rings, and then, you know, mana cost reduction. And, you know, you'll get that natively through mapping, so you don't have to do anything crazy at this stage. Same with the other ring. Basically, anything that gets you, you know, and this was played in Calandra League, right? So this is a pretty crazy ring. So there'll be a little bit more balancing that needs to be done to be able to get around this. But this, you know, this ring is outdated. Like, you know, we just have to find those stats elsewhere in the build, like whether it's in the helm or in the gloves, you get more cold res, but literally we're just stacking more cold res. Some mana regeneration is really good to have on your ring as well. And a lot of HP. As you can see, like, these aren't even like the best in slot rings that you could get for this type of build. These are like, this is an old Calandra ring that was pretty cool, and this is just a bleh, like Joe Blow ring basically. So, and I was cracking through everything at Endgame, and that's why I said, like, I wanted to come back to this build and really perfect this build a lot more than where I got it. It does use a brass dome. Brass domes aren't really expensive. They're like a few div after the first couple days. And if you're delving or hitting early maps, and I'll put up some early guides for that too, then you should be fine and you should be able to afford it. And you don't have to get a 6 link straight away. You can just get like a normal one, and it might be one div or like a few, you know, 100 chaos or something like that. And link wise, there's no off color linking that you really need to do here. It's pretty straightforward stuff. So yeah. Magnate tends to be a little bit expensive at the start of the league, but it's literally the best item that you could put on this. Gives you a huge amount of resistance as strength, which doesn't really do too much for you, but also flash charge generation. So when you start running your piano flasks and getting hit, generally all these gain charges when you get hit, then this is a huge advantage to the build. And also, not to mention, if you get it corrupted, you can get determination rolls on it like I have. But the double and the triple damage is just a huge game changer. Now, one of the biggest things on this build is around the use of focus. And for anyone who's used focus or played my builds before, what focus is it gives you, based on the item that applies whatever buff while focused, it gives you that buff. Now, these gloves in particular, they actually have attack and cast speed while focused. So I usually map focus to my move button, and then I've always got focus up. And it doesn't cost mana. It just works in the background. It's really good. It's a really good skill. Completely underplayed. There's also a belt roll for this with crit chances of lucky, which is really rare, but really good to have as well. So you want that on your gloves. Don't worry, not expensive in the first couple days of league. It's a very easy mod to get, and you can also get a craft on the bench as well for like 36% total. So, or like a high roll at 36% or so. And there's like 3 tiers of that roll. So really easy to get. Aside from that in the gloves, I usually get attack speed, life, any other resistances, and mana leech. And the other way that I get around rage on the Juggernaut, because this does use rage and you can run berserk on it, is by the implicit gain 1 rage on hit with attacks, which you won't get in the first few days, let's be real. But you will get it sort of as you level up, which is fine. Now, I had while unique enemies and your presence attacks have 25% chance to cause bleeding, you can have that, or you can switch that to anything else you want. You don't need that. And finally, boots, literally just movement speed, life, resistances. Like I had pretty good boots on this. You won't get this straight away, but you know, you get close. And then I had 40% increased armor from equipped helmets and gloves, and yep, that just caps out your armor, and then drops brittle ground while moving. Literally, you can craft that yourself, or you can craft an item yourself that can do that. Like, it's not hard, and if you're delving, you're going to get fractured items and whatnot. So, you know, not an unachievable sort of thing to get nor craft an elite. To be honest with you, like none of this gear is like mirror tier or anything like that. It's actually quite easy gear, as in like, and this is a true endgame build. It's quite easy to get. Now, flasks, I just had a life flask with corrupted blood. When you deal a crit, because you get like nearly 100% crit on this build, and brittle really pushes that up as well. Quicksilver flask, lion's roar, diamond flask, and I do have a bottled faith. I am fully aware someone will be like, you can't have a bottled faith on a league starter. It's like, use a bit of brain power here. You're not gonna have this tree at league start, buddy. We're gonna do a leveling tree second to this, so just calm your fucking goose. Don't click off the video because now you're angry by what I'm posting up with a bottle faith. Just chill, right? And in here somewhere, I wouldn't mind switching, for example, Quicksilver Flask out with Delving for a Progenesis Flask. Or potentially we just ditch the Eternal Life Flask altogether and chuck a Progenesis Flask, and this build just goes into complete God mode. That's it for the itemization. Like, oh, and your Anoint is going to be Infused Flesh, because I've got this set up to recoup life as you take damage, and that's actually, I'm pretty sure, in other areas of the build as well. But anyway, it's really good mod to have on this build. Makes it a hell of a lot more tanky as well. But that's it for the gearing on this build. So this is endgame gearing, and there'll be another video that'll go through early game gearing and how to level it, but I'll be doing that on stream. So anyway, let's talk through the skill setups. Okay, skill setups in this. All right, so Helm, I really just run Enduring Cry, and I drop that when I'm like moving around and like whatever. It's just like a save my ass sort of thing. Anomalous Assassin's Mark. Just start off with normal Assassin's Mark. Because we go crit, this makes more sense to run than like vulnerability curses or anything like that. Mark on hit support, because we can. Mark on hit's actually really good. And the other thing that synergizes when we go through the tree with this is I actually use Marked for Death on a Jug, which culls against marked enemies. And also I get 10% chance to gain frenzy charges when you hit a marked enemy. Now, when you take down bigger bosses or anything like this, this character actually culls bosses, which is why it's so powerful. So it's a really, like when I built this, I really thought about how you could make this like a one button easy mode build, and that's what it is. Now, Blood and Sand, obviously we switch between the stances constantly for AoE versus damage. In the sword, Blood Rage, Molten Shell, and Custom Damage Taken, like we take a ton of damage, so, and we can mitigate a ton of damage, so that's just going to pop it by itself. And that just gives us frenzy charges when we're getting hit by non-boss sort of minions and stuff in maps. I run Divergent Pride. You don't need Divergent Pride. This is min and max, so Divergent Pride, Vitality, and Determination were the auras that are reserved in the shield. And then in the chest, I run Divergent Shield Crush because this gives us increased crit multi. And then also Awaken Multi-Strike, and I'm aware it's Awaken Multi-Strike. Yes, normal multi-strike or divergent multi-strike will be fine when you're sort of leveling into red tier maps or mapping. Obviously, when you go down, you get a bit of currency, then you can afford multi-strike. Or you can just go farm Maven yourself, because you can smash her all day long with this build and it won't matter. Awaken Brutality. That's usually pretty cheap now because nobody plays bloody physical builds. Impale, obviously, Impale build. And so you want, I think, Anomalous Impale as your end game. I never got it because it was too expensive. Awaken melee physical damage and increase critical damage support, which with the changes I'm planning to do in the next league, and with the skill tree system for the items, it'll be more possible to get more intelligence into this build, because this build is a little dumb right now, so it doesn't have a lot of intelligence, like 87 intelligence. Now in the gloves, I've got Leap Slam, Ancestral War Chief, multiple totems, and Phantasmal Ancestral Protector. Now you'd be like, why have you got Phantasmal Ancestral Protector? It's because the percentage quality increases the effect of the totem, which makes it a really big buff for this build. So basically you go to a boss, you drop your Ancestral War totem and drop your Protect totem, and then just crack away with your Shield Crush. Now, for my my boots, I've got Defiance Banner, Life Gain on Hit, Anomalous Reckoning. Because we have like effectively max block, we can run Reckoning with Life Gain on Hit, and I ended up going on Anomalous. I can't quite, because it applies Debilitate. And then Precision. So we get our accuracy up, because this is an accuracy stacker as well as it is a strength star, as well as it is an armor stacker. And that's it for the skills. Pretty easy skill setup, nothing crazy. Now, in the leveling guide I'm going to put out, like, you're going to start off a little bit differently, but we'll talk about that when we get into that part of the video. Okay, this is the fun part of the video. So we'll talk about the leveling tree shortly, and I'll run you through that. But basically, all you're going to be doing is starting at the I like to call it the Jug Ascendancy, because the Marauder only has one Ascendancy worth playing, and it's the Jug. The Chieftain and the Zerka players are going to get the shits at that comment. So you're going to come down, you're going to get Versatility, Heart of the Warrior. Early on, always get Born to Fight, because that gives you increased attack speed and physical damage. Really good node to have. And then I come down, I always get Prismatic Skin, come up to get my life node up here as well. And then usually I'll come down, I'll grab all of these nodes for Solar Steel and Champion of the Cause. Now, some people will be like, oh, that's not enough damage early on, Well, early on, this build is a little slower to level up until you get SST, and then you just cheese your way through the game, because SST is just god tier. And then I come across and get Merciless Skewering, come across and grab Defiance, Master of the Arena, Art of the Gladiator. You'll come down and get Golem's Blood, Cloth and Chain. And as early on as you can, I would recommend moving to Mark for Death, because it's just an absolute game changer when you get to maps. Like having Cull on enemies when you get to maps, and then also generating Frenzy Charges on a Juggernaut is just god tier. So then we'll come up, you'll get Frenzy Charge for Savagery, because we found a way to generate that. Now, in the end game, Blue Nightmare, and this is actually getting buffed as well, I'm pretty sure, with the changes. So this is going to be even better than what it is now. But we have to take Cloth and Chain, so that increases our chance to generate power charges on kill. So we can get a crit up. And then we come back down, we grab Dismembering, we get Bloodless, we come up and get Aggressive Bastion, Juggernaut, this dual socket here to put whatever you feel like you want to put in there. I had life gain on hit from having Vitality up, and also chance to deal double damage with Pride. Or you could have Impales, do an additional Impale or whatever it is, and that'll beef your damage up as well. Then Barbarism. I had Hardy on this build as well, because I liked having a shitload of regeneration. And then Disemboweling for crit. And you could take the crit multi-node in this. It's just going to give you more power. Once you've got all of that, and this is a level 95 tree, by the way, then you'll come down and you'll put your clusters in. So I always work on clusters after you've leveled the build up and you've gotten everything else working. Clusters are just added damage for me usually, and a few extra other things. So anyway, you'll run Fuel the Fight, Prodigious Defense, Martial Prowess, and then Pressure Points and Basics of Pain. And then basically you'll get Blitz on Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame, and then slap that in the build as well. Now, somewhere in there you need to get Seething Fury as the first jewel that you need to get beyond everything else, because that's what's going to give you this huge damage buff as you go. That can be a little harder to get, but it comes from corrupting, Viridian Jewels? So good luck with that one, see how you go. That's basically the build, like the tree itself. Now, in the Ascendancy wise, the first Ascendancy I always get is going to be Unflinching on this, because you're going to get early Endurance charges, then you'll get Undeniable, then Unbreakable, then Unstoppable. And you will literally be unstoppable at that point. That's basically it for the tree. Now, obviously, this is an endgame tree, so we're going to talk about the leveling tree next. Okay, leveling tree. So, before anarchy descends on people going, fuck this guy, this is an endgame build, here's the leveling tree. So I've actually broken... Oh, no, wrong tree. Alright, leveling tree. So, I've given you at level 10 where you need to start from, which is just in here at level 20. So up to constitution and whatnot, exactly the way that I said it in the last section. Then we branch out, we get Art of the Gladiator, we get all of these nodes, and then we go to level 50. So we start to get a little bit more sort of spicy on the nodes we're getting for damage. And then we go to level 70. So we start to apply Mark for Death, and we start to move up into this sector of the tree. Then we go to level 85. We start to adjust for different things as we level up. Then we go to level 95. We get hardy, and we start to build out our clusters. And then if you go to level 100, you're stacking in another crit cluster, and then we get to about 20.8 million. Now, there'll be a leveling guide that I'm going to put up for this. That'll also talk to what you need to do in each. Now, when actually getting into the campaign and playing through the axe, when you're leveling this build, you'll want to start with Ground Slam, usually with a two-handed weapon. And I'll add notes into this tree and whatnot when I do the leveling guide over the next week and in the streams. But usually what I do is Ground Slam with a 2H weapon, and then I apply bleed damage on hit, or chance to bleed on hit, which is the support gem you'll get early on, usually with the duelist, but you can get it in Act 1. And then basically I'll take that until you get to level 28, which is around Act 3, I'm pretty sure from memory. Act 3? Act 4? And then once you get to level 28, you get access to Spectral Shield Throw. And then basically you can start rolling out with Spectral Shield Throw. Now, and then basically you'll play that until you get Multi-Strike, and then you can make a choice if you want to switch to Shield Crush, or if you want to stay on Spectral Shield Throw, because Spectral Shield Throw is really good, it scales really well. And then you'll level up to Endgame, or level up to past Act 10 with Spectral Shield Throw, and then switch to Shield Crush from there. That's basically the easiest way to level up. I could do like this crazy ass leveling sort of guide, act by act, and tell you everything about it. That's all I'm going to do, is literally Act 1 to Act 3. I'm going to be using Ground Slam with Bleed with a two-handed weapon. Then in Act 3, switch to Spectral Shield Throw, and then basically level all the way up. And then in the background, you just want to have Shield Crush sitting in your setup somewhere, and leveling up in the background, getting ready to basically use when you can. And that's all there is to it. And then basically the goal after that is then balance your resistances and balance it throughout as you play with the gearing that you'll have drop. And then target Emperor's Vigilance, Replica Dream Feather as soon as you can. And that's about all you need from uniques to get this build popping at the end of the day. And a Seething Fury, 3 items. Now, is this league start viable? Absolutely. If you're going to level with Spectral Shield Throw, you'll be fine. Yeah, that's all there is to it. Like, this will be a no-brainer to play from day one. Super tanky being a jug, so it's forgiving. So anyway, that's basically all I can say about it. Now, there will be a second video that's coming out to talk about that. But for now, that's the information that I can give you. Alright, I hope this gives you some ideas on what you could play. I'm super excited to play this build again, because I played it like just to kill Crystal King and sort of get some B-roll, and went, holy shit, this build is still amazing, and I can make this like way more powerful with the changes that are coming into the league. The other advantage is, if you're like me and you like delving early up, this is a really good build to push down and farm Crystal Kings, where you're not going to be worried about dying early on. You don't need to have like crazy itemization. And even the endgame itemization on this isn't like insane. A lot of it's just scaling up your skill gems, but the overall defense and everything else is really easy to get to early on, and that's one of the biggest advantages of this build, is its high defense. So, you know, you can work through things pretty easily. Mapping wise, once you have Mark for Death and you're pushing through maps, it's just an absolutely insane build. But anyway, if this video gives you yet another idea of what you want to play, drop me a like, drop me a sub, make sure you follow the Twitch. Also, there'll be a POB in the description with everything that's been discussed in this video, and there will be another updated leveling guide that will be coming out before the league start in next week. So watch out for that as well if you're going to have a crack at this build. Anyway, have a good one, and bye.